Today on Stock Charts in Focus, we're digging into the topic of the year, interest rates. We're going to show you 3 of the best, most powerful, most important ways to visualize interest rates on StockCharts.com. Now, obviously, something that has been a hot topic this year, really driving markets, really driving the narrative. And so we're going to show you how to visualize those interest rates, visualize how they're changing, and how they relate to each other and the stock market, all on today's show. Powerful tools, things I use in my own weekly process, and you, I have a feeling, are going to start using them as well. So, lots to cover on the show today. Of course, you know what it is. It's all new. It's all here. It's Stock Charts in Focus. All right, my friends, welcome to the show, Stock Charts in Focus. Of course, our product focus here on the channel where we dig into the site, dive into the tools, show you around the features, and show you how to get more value out of stock charts. That is our mission here every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time up on the live site, also up on our YouTube channel after that, and the on-demand platform at StockChartsTV.com. You got lots of ways to watch. I am Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts.com. Really good to be back with you. We were off last week, so good to be back in the saddle here on the show, digging into something that really couldn't be more important. Now, obviously, the topic this year, the big narrative has been the change in interest rates, everything that the Fed has been doing. It has been a huge year for rates, really driving markets, obviously driving markets lower with that pressure and the inflation story. So much going on surrounding interest rates. We hear a ton about it, right? You know, whether it's in the news or from friends or from commentators, we hear so much about what's happening with interest rates. But are you really seeing that change? Are you really seeing what's happening with those interest rates? Well, if you're answering that question and saying, you know what, I'm not really looking at the change in interest rates, I just know that they're going up, today's show is for you. Even if you are looking at interest rates, today's show is still for you because we got some great tools to highlight. We're going to take a little tour around the site, hit 3 different points where you can see interest rates, see how they're changing over time. As we said in the open, also see the relationship between different rates. You're going to be able to compare changes in rates to changes in the stock market, see how rates and the market interact. So we've got a ton to cover on today's show. As I mentioned in the open, these are tools, again, that I use every single week. We're going to actually dig into one of my favorite chart lists. You're even going to get that chart list if you want it. But we're going to dig into one of my favorite chart lists, pull up my rates chart, and show you exactly how I've built this very cool view. Looking at rates, looking at markets, looking at relationships. Lots that we're going to do on today's show. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So we are starting here on our charts and tools page for today's show. Our first stop is going to be a tool outside of the traditional price charts. You can access that, of course, by getting up to the top left corner of any page around the site. Hit that charts and tools link. That's going to take you right to this page. I do always like to stop and mention that this is a fantastic directory of everything that exists on Stock Charts. All of our tools listed here in the middle with little descriptions. You've also got quick access to everything if you kind of know where you're going or what you're trying to access. You've got that over on the right as well. But a great directory, whether you're a free user, whether you're a member, no matter who you are, the charts and tools page has a ton here for you. So our first stop on today's tour, like I said, going to be something outside of those traditional price charts. We are looking at our dynamic yield curve. As you can see here by that description, this is an interactive yield curve tool that allows you to kind of drag through time and see the relationship between different interest rates, see the relationship between rates and stocks as well, and see how that evolves over time. It is a very cool tool, one that we actually are really excited to enhance and continue to build out as we go. But the yield curve tool is a fantastic one. So that's going to be our first stop on today's show. To open this up, all you got to do, hit launch yield curve. And there you go. You're taken right over to our dynamic yield curve tool. So if you're familiar with the yield curve, this is going to be pretty familiar to you. We're going to kind of run through some of the features. Now, we're not going to talk a ton about sort of theory behind rates and all that stuff and how they relate to markets. We're not going to really get into that on today's show. We're mostly just highlighting the tools. But if you're not familiar with the yield curve, it is printing different rates at those different T-bills along the curve, and you can kind of see how those rates compare across different periods: 3 months, 3-month yields, 2-month yields, 5-year yields, 2-year yields, 5-year yields, 7, 10, 20, and 30-year yields. So you can print all those yields across what we call the yield curve and see how they compare. Now, is it a flat curve? Is it a steep curve? Is it an inverted curve? That is what this tool allows you to see. So first up in the chart, when you first load it, we've got the standard yield curve. Now this is going to have no trail, as we call it. This is just going to print those yields right across. Down below, you can see exactly what we're printing, and you can actually get those symbols. That's going to come in handy for our next stop on today's tour. So keep this in mind. But you can see UST 30-year, US Treasury 30-year yield, $ UST 30-year. That is sort of the format for these symbols. And you can do the same thing for 20s, 10s, 7s, 5s, 2 years, and then all the way down to 3-month yields. So these are the symbols that we are printing up here, and here are those yields printed across this chart. Now this is the latest value. We can do a couple of different things here. We can drag out this trail, to kind of see how that curve has changed in the recent past. So this gives you a sense of kind of how rates have been moving around. The other thing we can do with this, though, is we can drag through time. So over here on the right side of the chart, you actually have the S&P 500. You can see that right there, S&P 500 $SPX. This is going to show you a multi-year long-term view of the S&P 500, and you can see exactly what years we're at down at the bottom. So that red line is dragged all the way over to the right side of the chart, so we're in 2022. You can see this goes all the way back though to 2000. So a very long-term view of the S&P 500. The red line shows you where we are in time right now, and these two charts on the left and the right are actually going to be synced up. So you can sort of think about time in two different ways with this dynamic yield curve. You can drag out that trail to kind of see how rates have changed in the recent past, but you can also drag this red line through time to see how this yield curve has changed and where we are on the S&P 500, and you can start to compare exactly how that yield curve is affecting stocks. So let's see that in action. As I start to drag here, you can see that that yield curve is going to bounce around. Now I can drag this through time very, very quickly. We can go all the way back, for instance, to the Great Recession, to 2007 to 2009. We can sort of drag this red line through those recession years and actually see how the yield curve changed, see how steep it got. We can drag this to other periods where the yield curve started to invert, for instance, leading up to 2006, 2007, and 2008. So very, very interesting here to be able to actually kind of study history, study rates and stocks together on the same chart by dragging this red line through time. And when you also expand that trail out, if you like that kind of additional view, having more history on that yield curve, you can also get kind of a broader view of kind of how rates have been changing around those periods. Now, in my case, I like to see just the plain yield curve, so I actually like to keep that trail down. But I love playing around with this to kind of see where we've been going. Now, this is really interesting. So we can start, for instance, in 2019. We can drag this kind of through the pandemic period. We can see how low rates got. And then we can start to see exactly how high rates have been spiking off of kind of where we were, 2 years ago, especially. So this interactive capability that the dynamic yield curve brings is very, very cool. A great tool to study what's happening right now, but also a great way to study the past and kind of see how things have changed over time. Now, one other very cool tool that you have available to you, actually two others that we're going to cover really quickly. We can drag this all the way back, for instance, to, let's say, right before the Great Recession. That's kind of where we were right before we started to fall off a cliff in 07 and 08. What we can do is hit this snapshot button. That's going to pin that yield curve on this chart. So we're going to hit snapshot. You can see that that red line got a little bit darker. And now, as I drag this through time, you can see that we now have 2 red lines on our S&P 500 chart, and we have 2 yield curves on our interactive yield curve side of this chart. So that allows us to actually kind of pin a specific yield curve from a specific moment in time right on this chart, keep that in mind, and then start to compare it to other periods. So for instance, we can pin exactly where we were leading up to the Great Recession. We can compare that to where we are right now. Those two start to look pretty similar, don't they? So a very, very cool tool, again, for studying the past, comparing that to the future, kind of thinking about where we are now, where we've come from, being able to actually pin those yield curves right on this chart and compare things around. Super, super valuable. Now, if you want to get rid of that, all you got to do is hit clear. That's going to take us right back to a blank yield curve. One other thing that we can do that is also very fun, if you just kind of want to sit back and let the site do the work for you, let's say you wanted to start again right before the Great Recession, you can click that red line right onto the chart where you want to start, and then come down and hit this animate button. You hit that, and you can see I'm not doing anything. Here are my hands. I'm not moving this thing through time. The site is automatically moving us through time at a nice sort of slow enough pace that you can really kind of see how things evolve, but fast enough that it actually doesn't take very long to move through time. So this animate feature is very, very cool. You can kind of just sit here and watch, almost as if it's on TV, watch how that yield curve is changing over time, and then start to think again about the yield curve, the relationship to stocks, sort of where the market is and how the market is moving relative to where this yield curve is. There you can see how steep we got kind of coming out of the Great Recession, coming out of the 09 lows. So very, very cool stuff that you can do with this yield curve. It's a fun one to play around with. A very simple tool, really, but a very, very fun one to play around with. If you want to stop that animation, all you got to do, hit pause, and you're back to square one. So very cool what you can do here with the dynamic yield curve. I always love to show this to people. The first time people see it, they always get a kick out of it. It's a very cool tool, and especially in a year like this one, when we've seen such a change in rates, as we're actually going to see in a different view in just a minute. We've seen such a change in rates this year, so tools like this are incredibly, incredibly powerful. So before we jump over to our next tool, again, I want you to keep these symbols in mind. UST, the number 30, 20, 10, 7, and then Y if it is a multi-year yield, or in the case of those short-term yields, UST 3M is going to be the 3-month treasury yield. So keep these in mind because we're going to start to use those on the next chart. Where we're going to go next, again, I mentioned that our dynamic yield curve is kind of off of the traditional price charts. We're going to take some of these concepts and we're going to put them on a traditional price chart. We're going to do kind of the same thing, but we're going to actually put this on a sharp chart. We're going to have it in a chart list so that you can come back to it. Very cool stuff. So to do that, we're going to jump over to your dashboard. I want to show you kind of where this is in my account. And again, I mentioned that we're actually looking at a chart that I have in one of my weekly market evaluation lists. This is something that we've shared on the show in the past. So we're actually going to do that again. Down in the description below, you're going to get a link that's going to allow you to pull up the chart list that we're about to view. You can actually see that just on the site, or if you're a StockCharts member, you can save that chart list into your own account. So if we go through the rest of today's show, and you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'd really love to just get this chart without having to set it all up from scratch, look down in the description below. We're going to have that link for you, and you'll be able to install that chart list right into your account and grab the rates chart that we're going to build together. So we're going to jump over to your dashboard, of course, the heart and soul of your StockCharts account. And once we're over here, I'm actually going to hit chart list. That's going to jump us right down to all of the chart lists in my account. Now, we've highlighted some of this stuff in the past. We're not going to run through all of it, but as you can see, I have a very clear organization to a lot of the chart lists that I use to kind of run through the markets. We run through the major equities. We've got some S&P 500 highlights and things like that. And I like to split mine between weekly lists that I look at on a weekly basis, and the daily lists that I typically look at every single day. Right at the very top, there is what I call my weekly market evaluation chart list. And if we open this up in summary view, for instance, you'll just see all of the different names that I've given to everything in the list. So we go through things like the intermarket view. We look at global markets and emerging versus developed. We have some trend charts in here to look at some of the major indexes, see how different corners of the markets are moving. Lots and lots of interesting stuff in here: positioning versus exposure, offense versus defense. But down towards the bottom, we've got number 21, a rates chart. So this is something that I look at every single Sunday during my little Sunday portfolio routine. So this is what we are going to jump into today. Now, as I mentioned, you can actually get this chart list in your own account if you want it, and that's going to include this rates chart. So I'm going to click right over to our interest rates chart. Here we are. Now, we're basically going to take the concepts that we were just looking at, that kind of yield curve, yields across different treasury bills. We're going to take that and we're going to put it on a chart, but with a couple of other interesting things. We've got S&P 500 yields on here. We've got the Fed funds rate. We're even going to start to compare some of those different yields as well to kind of think about the curve when it's inverting, things like that. So this is kind of my ultimate rates chart, again, something that I look at every day. Let's walk through this from the top down. Now, the primary symbol that I've used on here is exclamation point YLDSPX. This is S&P 500 yield. So obviously, if you own the S&P 500, you got a lot of dividend payers in there. So there is a yield that you can think about on the S&P 500. Now, it doesn't change in quite the same way that rates do, because it's sort of under different control. But it is a really interesting kind of benchmark to compare rates to. You can see that S&P 500 yield in blue. I like to keep that on there to kind of know what stocks are yielding versus what some of these major treasury bills are yielding, some of the major rates are yielding. So that is going to be our primary symbol, yield on the S&P 500. We've then got three key rates here. I'll actually turn off the inspector so you can see this a little better. We've got three key rates here. We've got the 30-year treasury yield, we've got the 10-year treasury yield, and the 2-year treasury yield. Green, orange, red, 30-year, 10-year, and 2-year. Those are going to be sort of the, I've picked and chosen those, but those are going to be kind of the primary ones that I want to think about. Now, I've done that for a specific reason. Think about what we have there. We have a short-term yield, the 2. We've got an intermediate-term yield, the 10. And we've got a 30-year treasury yield, kind of a longer-term rate. So in one view, I've got 3 rates, but I can think about kind of short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term rates right on there. Now, the black line is going to be the Fed funds rate, obviously one that has been a hot topic of this year. I also want to think about how that rate is moving. Now, what we can see on this chart is a very, very long-term view, kind of like we were looking at on that dynamic yield curve with the S&P 500 chart on the right, going all the way back to 2000. This is a 20-year chart, so this is going to take us all the way back into 2002, technically, but basically starting at 2003. So this is a long-term view of rates, how they've been moving. What we can see here is the kind of unprecedented rise in rates, this rapid rise from the end of 2021 up until right now here in November of 2022. We have seen a massive, massive rise in rates, but also not just the size of that rate increase, it's been the speed of that rate increase. We can see these lines just absolutely rocketing higher. So again, kind of in the opening of the show, when we talked about, you're hearing this story about rising rates, are you actually seeing that? Well, every week I get to see that. I get to take a look at this chart and see, it kind of reinforces again how wild this rise in rates has really been in the last year. And I can see that across, all these different rates, not just short-term yields, but short-term, intermediate-term, long-term Fed funds rate. We can see how crazy that rise has been. So we've got all of those jammed into one price panel. You might be wondering how we do that. Let's scroll down this page a little bit and we'll take a look at the settings for this. So again, we've got our primary symbol in blue. That's going to be the S&P 500 yield, but we're going to want to add those additional symbols on here. Now, I told you to kind of keep in mind those symbols that we were looking at on the dynamic yield curve page. This is why we did that. You can see those same symbols right here. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've added 4 overlays to this chart. Again, we've got our primary symbol is the S&P 500 yield. I've added 4 additional price data sets to this chart using the price same scale overlay. So we come down to the overlays menu, select price same scale. In the parameters box, we're then going to type in our symbol. And because we've selected price same scale, it's going to keep it on the same scale as that S&P 500 yield. Now, these are 4 rate symbols, so we can compare those on the same scale. We don't want to have different ones. We don't want to have them kind of auto-scaling to whatever that symbol is, like some other times when we're comparing different securities, different indexes, things like that. In this case, we want all of these to share the same scale, so that's why we're using that price same scale option in the overlays menu. Then we're going to type in our 4 different symbols that we want to add to that S&P 500 yield chart. So these are overlays, which means they're going to get added right up here behind that primary symbol being that S&P 500 yield. Now, we could also do this down here in the indicators section. We could add the price indicator and set the position as behind price. But in this case, it's actually easier to do overlays, use that price same scale option, and then type in our different symbols. So I've gone ahead and typed this in already. We're just kind of looking at the way that I've set this up. So in the first box, we've got our 30-year yield. Second one is our 10-year yield. Third is our 2-year yield. And then down below that, we've got our Fed rate as well. Now that's kind of a funky symbol, double dollar sign there because it's kind of a special index. But that is what that looks like, just in case you want to pull it up for yourself. $2 signs and then Fed rate. I've set all of those to be solid lines, and I've given each one a different color so that they are distinguished on that chart. Once you type all this in though and you hit update, that's going to load this chart, and it's going to have all 4 of those price data sets in addition to that S&P 500 yield. Because this is a long-term chart, we get long-term views of all of them, and it's all there in one panel. So again, this is allowing us to compare these different rates, compare them over time as well, kind of how they've moved, and see exactly how crazy that rise in rates in the last year has been. So that's our top panel. That's how we set up that sort of primary rates view, getting a couple of those key rates up into that main price panel. Down below that, we are comparing 2 key rates. We're comparing the 2-year yield and the 10-year yield. Now, people have different ways that they like to think about the yield curve and how it's inverting, when it's inverting. I like to use the 2 and the 10 to kind of judge my yield curve. When the 2 crosses above the 10, that to me signals an inverted yield curve. That's a short-term yield crossing over the intermediate-term yield. That to me signals that inverted yield curve. So I'm actually charting that on this by comparing 2 of those symbols that we're looking at up above. So this gold line is using what we call a ratio symbol. A ratio symbol takes 2 separate symbols on stock charts, separates them with a colon, and when you do that, you're actually printing one ratio versus, or one symbol versus the other one as a ratio. Now, we've talked about this on the show in the past. This is how you can do relative strength lines. So you can type in, for instance, MSFT : SPX. That's going to give you Microsoft versus the S&P 500. So you can use those ratio symbols for a whole bunch of different reasons. You can use them to create those relative strength lines. You can compare and contrast any 2 symbols on the site. In this case, what we're doing is we're comparing, again, 2 key yields, the 2-year and the 10-year, to track that yield curve and see when it is inverting. Now, inverting means that the 2 is going to cross above the 10, and since they share the same scale, that means that inverting is actually a value of 1.0. So what I've also done is added a horizontal line across this panel at 1.0 to see exactly when the yield curve inverts according to the 2 and the 10. You can see that we almost inverted, might just have made it back in 2019. We were very, very close to inverting. We have inverted now back in 2022. So the yield curve currently is inverted with that 2 sitting above that 10. And you can compare that again because this is a long-term chart. We can go back to 2006, 2007, 2008. We can see when that yield curve inverted just before the Great Recession. So again, let's scroll down and let's take a look at exactly how I've set this up. So in the indicator section now, we have a price indicator. And just like we said, we've got that ratio symbol typed in here. So we're taking our 2-year yield, $UST 2Y, separating these two with a colon. So UST 2-year colon UST 10-year. You can see we've got the 10-year on the back half of that ratio symbol. So we type in those two symbols, we separate them with a colon. I've positioned that below the primary price panel. I've given it a gold color. And then one other thing that I've done here is I've set the height to be 0.5. Now by default, this is actually going to be a little bit slimmer. I like to use 0.5 for a lot of my indicator heights. That means it's going to be half as tall as the primary price panel. So if we actually scroll up here, this panel is going to be half as tall as this panel. For me, that just kind of prints well, so I like to use 0.5 as my height for that. Then we've added our overlay, so we've got our horizontal line selected in this menu, and I've set that to 1:black. So that's going to give us that horizontal line going across that yield comparison, going across that panel at 1.0. We're going to have our horizontal black line. So we've got that right in there as an overlay on that price indicator. So super easy to set that up. And again, once you hit update, you're going to get that panel going across. Now you could do this with different rates. You could actually have multiple panels on here. Maybe you want to compare 3-month to 2-year, and then you want to have 2-year versus 10, and you want to have 10 versus 30. Maybe you want to have 2 versus 30. Any of the pairs that you want to see, you can use this same trick. Also, on any other charts that you can use, just like we said with MSFT colon SPX, you can actually use that ratio symbol trick for many other things. I use it for relative strength lines, like I mentioned, on pretty much all my charts. So a nice handy little trick, but that's going to print that relationship between those two ratios. Now, finally, at the bottom of this chart, just like we had on that yield curve, that dynamic yield curve tool, we want to compare things to the S&P 500, right? We want to compare things to stocks. Now we're using the S&P 500 here as a sort of as a proxy for stocks as a whole. It's not perfect, but it is still a pretty good candidate. So we've got the S&P 500 printed at the bottom of this chart. Let's take a look at how we do that. We've got another price data set in the indicators menu. So we select price from that menu, and then we type in here $SPX. And I've set this to be a log scale chart. The way that you do that here in the parameters box is type in log. That's going to make that S&P 500 chart in logarithmic scale. So especially for a long-term chart like this one, we've got 20 years worth of history. If we didn't print this as a log chart, it would kind of distort things just a little bit. So I want to have my my S&P 500 chart in log scale there. You can see that on the right side. So we type in $SPX, log. That's going to give us our S&P 500 chart. Again, I've set that to be below, and I've set that to just be a solid line because I just kind of want to think about the relationship between interest rates and the market, the stock market. So I don't really need candlesticks and all that stuff. But if you did want that, you do have that option in this menu. Final thing I've done there, I want that to be nice and big, so I've actually set the height on that S&P 500 chart to be 1.0. So as you can see, that's going to make it a little bit taller. We've got our relationship, our kind of yield curve there in the middle, a little bit slimmer, but we've got our S&P 500 chart nice and tall. So that is kind of our ultimate rates chart. Again, you get a picture now of how some of those different yields at some of those different sort of time frames really compare. You can see exactly how they're moving. You can compare them also to the past. So we can start to think about, where were rates leading up to 07 to 09? Where are rates now? Where are rates versus where they were in 2015 to 2018, for instance? One nice feature also to turn on here on the SharpCharts workbench, hit that inspect checkbox. That is going to give you the horizontal and vertical line, as you can see there. And so you can actually sort of, drag this up and see exactly where we are now on, for instance, the 2-year versus where we were sort of leading up to the Great Recession. You can also measure different things. So if you wanted to measure percentages in either direction, you can see actually, how far we've come up on a percentage basis, how far yields have moved. Crazy stuff. And you can do this inspector as well to kind of compare, like we were doing with that dynamic yield curve. You can kind of compare different parts of the chart at the top to where we are down at the bottom. So you see that that vertical line will actually go through the entire chart. So when you drag this back, for instance, to 2011, you can see kind of that peak in 2011. We can drag that down, scroll down, and see exactly what the market was doing at that time. We kind of chopped around a little bit and then actually had a little bit of a dip in 2011 and into 2012. So nice to be able to kind of compare things, use that inspector actually to kind of see exactly where you are, compare and contrast all up and down this chart. So that is our ultimate rates chart. Hopefully it's giving you a sense of kind of what you can do. You can use some of these setup tricks down here on the Sharp Charts workbench, different price indicators, price same scale, overlays indicators to build up a view like this. Now, fortunately, you don't actually have to build this thing yourself because again, remember, down in the description below, we've actually got a link to that weekly market evaluation chart list from my own account. You can take a look at that link, pull up the page that it links over to, and there's a big green button at the top. You can actually install that into your own StockCharts account. So if you do that, if you grab this chart list, install it into your own account, you're going to get this rates chart. So you can start to either use this as is or use it as kind of a template to get you started creating a rates view of your own. Now again, this is the one that I like to see with the 2, the 10, the 30, adding funds rate in there, Fed rate in there, and the S&P 500 yield. But you might want to customize this with your own definition of the yield curve. You might want to customize this with other rates from that dynamic yield curve that we looked at. You can customize this in any number of ways. Maybe you want to change the S&P 500 chart down at the bottom to be something broader like the NYSE or VTI if you use that one. You can start to customize this chart once you get it into your own account, but it's going to be a helpful starter for you. So look down in the description below. Check out that weekly market evaluation link. We're going to have that down there. You can actually download that into your own account, make it easy on yourself. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. It's been fun to be with you for another episode of Stock Charts in Focus, digging into some different tools that you can use to visualize rates, to actually see how they're changing over time. Obviously, that has been a huge story this year. Will probably continue to be a huge story into 2023 as well. So being able to not just kind of know where rates are going, know that they're going up or going down, being able to actually see that on the chart and actually think back, compare to past history of where rates have been. Think about how rates have affected stocks with the different comparisons there. Whether you're on the dynamic yield curve, you've got kind of that left-right comparison, that S&P 500 chart on the right, or if you're on that ultimate rates chart that we pulled up, you've also got the S&P 500 at the bottom. So being able to compare kind of how rates have moved, where they've moved, how far they've moved, and how that's affected stocks. Very cool tools being able to set this up with rates and stocks on the same screen. So hopefully you've had some fun seeing some of these tools in action. Again, things that I personally use every week. They've been incredibly helpful for me. So hopefully these tools are going to be helpful for you as well. Remember, we do this show every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, up on the live channel, also up on our YouTube channel after that, and the on-demand platform at StockChartsTV.com. So you got lots and lots of ways to watch, just like all of our Stock Charts TV shows. But we do this every Friday, just kind of digging into the site. And ultimately, our mission is to help you get more value out of Stock Charts, get more value out of the site, get more value out of all the tools and features that we have. So we're always highlighting something new, something exciting, something old that you might not have seen in a while. Whatever it is, this is the place to see it in action, learn about it, hear about it, and we always have some fun along the way. So hopefully you'll join me for another edition of Stock Charts in Focus. We'll be back next Friday with more content for you. But until then, my name is Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts.com. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend ahead. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you again soon. Until then, chart on, my friends.